a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Alvin York. Alvin Cullum York, also known as Sergeant York, was one of the most decorated United States Army soldiers of World War I. He received the Medal of Honor for leading an attack on a German machine gun nest, taking 35 machine guns, killing at least 25 enemy soldiers, and capturing 132. York's Medal of Honor action occurred during the United States-led portion of the Meuse-Argonne Offensive in France, which was intended to breach the Hindenburg line and force the Germans to surrender. York was born in rural Tennessee. His parents farmed, and his father worked as a blacksmith. The 11 York children had minimal schooling, because they helped provide for the family, which included hunting, fishing, and hiring out as laborers. After the death of York's father, he assisted in caring for his younger siblings, and found work as a logger and on construction crews. Despite being a regular churchgoer, York also drank heavily, and was prone to fistfights. After a 1914 conversion experience, he vowed to improve, and became even more devoted to the Church of Christ and Christian Union. York was drafted during World War I. He initially claimed conscientious objector status on the grounds that his denomination forbade violence. Persuaded that his religion was not incompatible with military service, York joined the 82nd Division as an infantry private, and went to France in 1918. In October 1918, as a newly promoted corporal, York was one of a group of 17 soldiers assigned to infiltrate German lines and silence a machine gun position. After the American patrol had captured a large group of enemy soldiers, German small arms fire killed 6 Americans and wounded 3. York was the highest ranking of those still able to fight, so he took charge. While his men guarding the prisoners, York attacked the machine gun position, dispatching several German soldiers with his rifle. By the time 6 Germans charged him with bayonets, he was out of rifle ammunition, so he drew his pistol and shot them all. The German officer responsible for the machine gun position had emptied his pistol while firing at York, but failed to hit him. This officer then offered to surrender, and York accepted. York and his men marched back to their unit's command post with more than 130 prisoners. York was immediately promoted to sergeant, and was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. A later investigation led to this award being upgraded to the Medal of Honor. York became a national hero and international celebrity. He went on to receive decorations from several foreign countries, including France, Italy, and Montenegro. Businessmen in Tennessee organized the purchase of a farm for York, his new wife, and their growing family. He later formed a charitable foundation to improve educational opportunities for children in rural Tennessee. In the 1930s and 1940s, York worked as a project superintendent for the Civilian Conservation Corps and managed construction of the Bird Lake Reservoir at Cumberland Mountain State Park, after which he served for several years as park superintendent. A 1941 film about his World War I exploits, Sergeant York, was that year's highest-grossing film. Gary Cooper won the Academy Award for Best Actor for his portrayal of York, and the film was credited with enhancing American morale as mobilization for World War II began in earnest. In his later years, York was confined to bed by health problems. He died in Nashville, Tennessee, in 1964 and was buried at Wolf River Cemetery in his hometown of Pall Mall. Early life and ancestry. Alvin Cullum York was born in a 2-room log cabin near Pall Mall, Tennessee. He was the third child born to William Uriah York and Mary Elizabeth York. William Uriah York was born in Jamestown, Tennessee, to Uriah York and Eliza Jane Livingston, both travelers from Buncombe County, North Carolina. Mary Elizabeth York was born in Pall Mall to William Brooks, who took his mother's maiden name as an alias of William H. Harrington after deserting from Company A of the Michigan 11th Cavalry during the Civil War, and Nancy Pyle, and was the great-granddaughter of Conrad Coonrod Pyle, an English settler who settled Pall Mall. William York and Mary Brooks married on December 25, 1881, and had 11 children. The York children were, in order, Henry Singleton, Joseph Marion, Alvin Cullum, Samuel John, Albert, Hattie, George Alexander, James Preston, Lillian May, Robert Daniel, and Lucy Irma. The York family is mainly of English ancestry, with Scots-Irish ancestry as well. The York family resided in the Indian Creek area of Fentress County. The family was impoverished, with William York working as a blacksmith to supplement the family's income. The men of the York family farmed and harvested their own food, while the mother made all of the family's clothing. The York sons attended school for only 9 months and withdrew from education, because William York needed his sons to help him work the family farm and hunt and fish to help feed the family. When William York died in November 1911, his son Alvin helped his mother raise his younger siblings. Alvin was the oldest sibling still residing in the county, since his 2 older brothers had married and relocated. To supplement the family's income, York worked in Harriman, Tennessee, first in railroad construction and then as a logger. By all accounts, he was a skilled laborer who was devoted to the welfare of his family. York was also a violent alcoholic prone to fighting in saloons and accumulated several arrests within the area. His mother, a member of a pacifist Protestant denomination, tried to persuade York to change his ways. Despite his history of drinking and fighting, York attended church regularly and often led the hymn singing. A revival meeting at the end of 1914 led him to a conversion experience on January 1, 1915. His congregation was the Church of Christ in Christian Union, a Protestant denomination that shunned secular politics and disputes between Christian denominations. This church had no specific doctrine of pacifism, but it had been formed in reaction to the Methodist Episcopal Church, South's support of slavery, including armed conflict during the American Civil War, and it opposed all forms of violence. In a lecture later in life, he reported his reaction to the outbreak of World War I. "I was worried clean through. I didn't want to go and kill. I believed in my Bible." On June 5, 1917, at the age of 29, Alvin York registered for the draft, as all men between 21 and 31 years of age were required to do on that day. When he registered for the draft, he answered the question, "Do you claim exemption from draft?" by writing, "Yes. Don't want to fight." When his initial claim for conscientious objector status was denied, he appealed. In World War I, conscientious objector status did not exempt one from military duty. Such individuals could still be drafted and were given assignments that did not conflict with their anti-war principles. In November 1917, while York's application was considered, he was drafted and began his army service at Camp Gordon in Georgia. From the day he registered for the draft until he returned from the war on May 29, 1919, York kept a diary of his activities. In his diary, York wrote that he refused to sign documents provided by his pastor seeking a discharge from the army on religious grounds and similar documents provided by his mother asserting a claim of exemption as the sole support of his mother and siblings. Despite his initial, signed request for an exemption, York also later disclaimed ever having been a conscientious objector. World War I. York was drafted into the United States Army and served in Company G, 328th Infantry Regiment, 82nd Infantry Division at Camp Gordon, Georgia. Deeply troubled by the conflict between his pacifism and his training for war, he spoke at length with his company commander, Captain Edward Courtney Bullock, 4th of Augusta, Georgia, and his battalion commander, Major G. Edward Buxton of Providence, Rhode Island, a devout Christian himself. Biblical passages about violence cited by Danforth persuaded York to reconsider the morality of his participation in the war. Granted a 10-day leave to visit home, he returned convinced that God meant for him to fight and would keep him safe, as committed to his new mission as he had been to pacifism. He served with his division in the St. Mile Offensive, during an attack by his battalion to capture German positions near Hill 223 along the Decauville rail line north of Château-Thierry, France, on October 8, 1918. York's actions earned him the Medal of Honor. He recalled, under the command of Sergeant Bernard Early, 4 non-commissioned officers, including recently promoted Corporal York, and 13 privates were ordered to infiltrate the German lines to take out the machine guns. The group worked their way behind the Germans and overran the headquarters of a German unit, capturing a large group of German soldiers who were preparing a counterattack against the U.S. troops. Early's men were contending with the prisoners when machine gun fire suddenly peppered the area, killing 6 Americans and wounding 3 others. The fire came from German machine guns on the ridge. The loss of the 9 put Corporal York in charge of the 7 remaining U.S. soldiers. As his men remained undercover, guarding the prisoners, York worked his way into position to silence the German machine guns. York recalled, during the assault, 6 German soldiers in a trench near York charged him with fixed bayonets. York had fired all the rounds in his M1917 Enfield rifle, but drew his M1911 semi-automatic pistol, and shot all 6 soldiers before they could reach him. German First Lieutenant Paul Jürgen Vollmar, commander of the 1st Battalion, 120th Landwehr Infantry, emptied his pistol trying to kill York while he was contending with the machine guns. Failing to injure York, and seeing his mounting losses, he offered in English to surrender the unit to York, who accepted. By the end of the engagement, York and his 7 men marched 132 German prisoners back to the American lines. Upon returning to his unit, York reported to his brigade commander, Brigadier General Julian Robert Lindsay, who remarked, "Well, York, I hear you have captured the whole damn German army." York replied, "No sir, I got only 132. His actions silenced the German machine guns and were responsible for enabling the 328th Infantry to renew its attack to capture the Decauville Railroad. York was promptly promoted to sergeant and received the Distinguished Service Cross. A few months later, an investigation by York's chain of command resulted in an upgrade of his Distinguished Service Cross to the Medal of Honor, which was presented by the commanding general of the American Expeditionary Forces, General John J. Pershing. The French Republic awarded him the Croix de Guerre, the Médaille Militaire and the Legion of Honor. When decorating York with the Croix de Guerre, Marshal Ferdinand Foch told York, "What you did was the greatest thing accomplished by any soldier of all the armies of Europe." In addition to his French medals, Italy awarded York the Croce al Merito di Guerra and Montenegro decorated him with its War Medal. He eventually received nearly 50 decorations. York's Medal of Honor citation reads, "In attempting to explain his actions during the 1919 investigation that resulted in the Medal of Honor, York told General Lindsay, 'A higher power than man guided and watched over me and told me what to do.'" Lindsay replied, "York, you are right." Homecoming and fame. Before leaving France, York was his division's non-commissioned officer delegate to the convention which created the American Legion, of which York was a charter member. York's heroism went unnoticed in the United States press, even in Tennessee, until the publication of the April 26, 1919 issue of the Saturday Evening Post, which had a circulation in excess of 2 million. In an article titled, "The Second Elder Gives Battle," journalist George Patallo, who had learned of York's story while touring battlefields earlier in the year, laid out the themes that have dominated York's story ever since: the mountaineer, his religious faith and skill with firearms, patriotic, plain-spoken, and unsophisticated, an uneducated man who seems to do everything correctly by intuition. In response, the Tennessee Society, a group of Tennesseans living in New York City, arranged celebrations to greet York upon his return to the United States, including a 5-day furlough to allow for visits to New York City and Washington, D.C. York arrived in Hoboken, New Jersey, on May 22, stayed at the Waldorf Astoria, and attended a formal banquet in his honor. He toured the subway system in a special car before continuing to Washington, where the House of Representatives gave him a standing ovation and he met Secretary of War Newton D. Baker and the President's Secretary Joe Tumulty. As President Wilson was still in Paris, York proceeded to Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, where he was discharged from the service, and then to Tennessee for more celebrations. He had been home for barely a week when, on June 7, 1919, York and Gracie Loretta Williams were married by Tennessee Governor Albert H. Roberts in Pall Mall. More celebrations followed the wedding, including a week-long trip to Nashville, where York accepted a special medal awarded by the state. York refused many offers to profit from his fame, including thousands of dollars offered for appearances, product endorsements, newspaper articles, and movie rights to his life story. Instead, he lent his name to various charitable and civic causes. To support economic development, he campaigned for the Tennessee government to build a road to service his native region, succeeding when a highway through the mountains was completed in the mid-1920s and named Alvin C. York Highway. The Nashville Rotary organized the purchase, by public subscription, of a 400-acre farm, the one gift that York accepted. However, it was not the fully equipped farm he was promised, requiring York to borrow money to stock it. He subsequently lost money in the farming depression that followed the war. Then the Rotary was unable to continue the installment payments on the property, leaving York to pay them himself. In 1921, he had no option but to seek public help, resulting in an extended discussion of his finances in the press, some of it sharply critical. Debt in itself was a trial. I could get used to most any kind of hardship, but I'm not fitted for the hardship of owing money. Only an appeal to Rotary clubs nationwide and an account of York's plight in the New York World brought in the required contributions by Christmas 1921. After the war, in the 1920s, York formed the Alvin C. York Foundation with the mission of increasing educational opportunities in his region of Tennessee. Board members included the area's Congressman, Cordell Hull, who later became Secretary of State under President Franklin D. Roosevelt, Secretary of the Treasury William G. McAdoo, and Tennessee Governor Albert Roberts. Plans called for a non-sectarian institution providing vocational training to be called the York Agricultural Institute. York concentrated on fundraising, though he disappointed audiences who wanted to hear about the Argonne when he instead explained that, "I occupied one space in a 50-mile front. I saw so little it hardly seems worthwhile discussing it. I'm trying to forget the war in the interest of the mountain boys and girls that I grew up among." He fought first to win financial support from the state and county, then battled local leaders about the school's location. Refusing to compromise, he resigned and developed plans for a rival York Industrial School. After a series of lawsuits, he gained control of the original institution and was its president when it opened in December 1929. As the Great Depression deepened, the state government failed to provide promised funds, and York mortgaged his farm to fund bus transportation for students. Even after he was ousted as president in 1936 by political and bureaucratic rivals, he continued to donate money. In 1935, York, sensing the end of his time with the institute, began to work as a project superintendent with the Civilian Conservation Corps, overseeing the creation of Cumberland Mountain State Park's Bird Lake, one of the largest masonry projects the program ever undertook. York served as the park's superintendent until 1940. During World War II, York attempted to re-enlist in the army. However, at 54 years of age, overweight, near-diabetic, and with evidence of arthritis, he was denied enlistment as a combat soldier. Instead, he was commissioned as a major in the Army Signal Corps, and he toured training camps and participated in bond drives in support of the war effort, usually paying his own travel expenses. General Matthew Ridgway later recalled that York created in the minds of farm boys and clerks the conviction that an aggressive soldier, well-trained and well-armed, can fight his way out of any situation. He also raised funds for war-related charities, including the Red Cross. He served on his county draft board, and when literacy requirements forced the rejection of large numbers of Fentress County men, he offered to lead a battalion of illiterates himself, saying they were crack shots. Although York served during the war, with the rank of major in the Army Signal Corps and as a colonel with the 7th Regiment of the Tennessee State Guard, newspapers continued to refer to him as Sergeant York. Legacy and film story. York cooperated with journalists in telling his life story twice in the 1920s. York allowed Nashville-born freelance journalist Sam Cowan to see his diary and submit it to interviews. The resulting 1922 biography focused on York's Appalachian background, describing his upbringing among the purest Anglo-Saxons to be found today, emphasizing popular stereotypes without bringing the man to life. A few years later, York contacted a publisher about an edition of his war diary, but the publisher wanted additional material to flesh out the story. Then Tom Skehill, an Australian-born veteran of the Gallipoli campaign, visited York in Tennessee, and the two became friends. On York's behalf, Skehill wrote an autobiography in the first person, and was credited as the editor of Sergeant York, his own life story and war diary. With a preface by Newton D. Baker, Secretary of War in World War I, It presented a one-dimensional York supplemented with tales of life in the Tennessee mountains. Reviews noted that York only promoted his life story in the interest of funding educational programs. Perhaps York's bearing after his famous exploit in the Argonne best reveals his native greatness. He will not exploit himself except for his own people. All of which gives his book an appeal beyond its contents. The mountaineer myth that Cowan and Ski Hill promoted reflected York's own beliefs. In a speech at the 1939 New York World's Fair, he said, "We, the descendants of the pioneer long hunters of the mountains, have been called Scotch-Irish and pure Anglo-Saxon, and that is complimentary, I reckon. But we want the world to know that we are Americans. The spiritual environment and our religious life in the mountains have made our spirit wholly American, and that true pioneer American spirit still exists in the Tennessee mountains. Even today, I want you all to know. With all the clamor of the world and its evil attractions, you still find in the little humble log cabins in the Tennessee mountains that old-fashioned family altar of prayer, the same that they used to have in Grandma's and Grandpa's day, which is the true spirit of the long hunters. We in the Tennessee mountains are not transplanted Europeans. Every fiber in our body and every emotion in our hearts is American." For many years, York employed a secretary, Arthur S. Bushing, who wrote the lectures and speeches York delivered. Bushing prepared York's correspondence as well. Like the works of Cowan and Ski Hill, words commonly ascribed to York, though doubtless representing his thinking, were often composed by professional writers. York had refused several times to authorize a film version of his life story. Finally, in 1940, as York was looking to finance an interdenominational Bible school, he yielded to a persistent Hollywood producer and negotiated the contract himself. In 1941, the movie Sergeant York, directed by Howard Hawks with Gary Cooper in the title role, told about his life and Medal of Honor action. The screenplay included much fictitious material, though it was based on York's diary. The marketing of the film included a visit by York to the White House where FDR praised the film. Some of the response to the film divided along political lines, with advocates of preparedness and aid to Great Britain enthusiastic and isolationists calling it propaganda for the administration. It received 11 Oscar nominations and won 2, including the Academy Award for Best Actor for Cooper. It was the highest-grossing picture of 1941. York's earnings from the film, about $150,000 in the first 2 years as well as later royalties, resulted in a decade-long battle with the Internal Revenue Service. York eventually built part of his planned Bible school, which hosted 100 students until the late 1950s. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Would you like to know more?